Hey guys, this is Michelle on Pretty Petticoat Sewing, and we are working on the gold and blue Italian Renaissance costume, and I'm about to cut out the lining for the bodice. Now, when last we met, we put the bodice together, and I'm going to walk you through a couple of little things that I've done since then. But right now I thought I'd start with this, and I know that it's, again, this is a small area to be seeing on the screen. I'm going to try to pull it up just a little. There we go. Okay, so I've pinned the back piece. There's two layers here. There's a fold right here. I've pinned the front piece and the back piece, and this is just a piece of silk de peony that I'm using for the lining. Now, I'm going to be making some piping out of this silk de peony, and I am really fond of saving every little scrap that I possibly can. So I'm actually marking with my pencil here, which you should be able to see these lines right there and right there. I am marking all the places that are not in this bodice with 2-inch wide bias strips so that I can piece them together so that I can use them for my I'm going to push this down just a little bit more so that I can use them for my piping. And this is just a trick that I like to use because, as I said, I'm really trying to use every single bit of this fabric. I'm trying to use up all the scraps. If they're too small for bias, I'm going to set them aside and use them later for buttons that are probably going to be for another project. But in the meantime, I thought I really want to make sure that I use every bit of this that I can. So before I even cut this stuff out, I'm going to make sure that I've got my good 45-degree angle from my selvage, which I've already done. And I'm just going to draw in this is entirely too small here at the corner. It's just this way. It's just a little too small to really be worth it. So I'm going to skip that. But I am going to go right here. I'm trying to make sure I'm going the opposite direction I'm supposed to be. I am going to go 2 inches from this last line that I drew, which is right there. And I'm going to draw a line up here because this is, while it's short, it's still a good piece, good length to use right here. And then I'm going to go 2 inches from that one. And I'm just gonna mark this in here because it's probably only going to be about 5 inches of that I'm going to be able to use, right? It's just going to be that. But I'm still going to mark it just in case. Now, some of these might just be too small, and if they are, I will leave them uncut and use the pieces for buttons instead. But I like to just make sure that I've marked it already with this pencil, just so that if I do want, so that's going to be all too small in that area. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. And then I'm going to come over here and let's see, there's a line. Okay, so I'm just going to mark from this line here, right here. And this might seem short, but the next section isn't going to be that short. So I'm going to use that to mark the next section and the next section. That way I can have any little bits that I am able to have for this piping. And diagonal on the, bias is basically, I'm just making bias strips, and bias can go a really, really long way. So even if it seems like it's just a little bit, especially when it's piping, it's going to be a little bit less obvious that there's more seams than less. So I went ahead and did that because I think that I will use every bit of this this extra fabric. So none of this right here is going to go to waste, and I'm really excited about that because I don't like losing any more fabric than I have to. So then I'm just going to cut this out very quickly, and then we're going to bounce back in a few minutes, not exactly right this minute. When last we were live here, not live, but recording here, I had, and this is going to be for some buttons, I had sewn the bodice together, and between then and now, I have put an interlining into the bodice, and it has, so there's a couple of things that I want to show you, and I will get to that just as soon as I'm done here, but I wanted to not close it up entirely because I had a little moment where I made a bit of a mistake, and I like to try and show those. I don't want to hide those because I want people to see that mistakes can totally be fixed, and you know, perfection is something that we shouldn't be, you know, doggedly going towards because it's just too much. It's too much on my bones. It's too much on my stress anyway, and I'm sure other people feel the same way. So I think going easy on yourself and not being too particular about the insides of some things is probably for the best. Just to keep your stress levels down. Sewing is, I mean, in my opinion, sewing is supposed to be fun, and I really hope that people are enjoying it and not doing it because they have to and they hate it. So, you know, that's a thing. So I'm going to take this, while I'm doing this, I'm going to cut these strips, and this is going to be one right here. And these are big enough for buttons, so I'm going to save them. This is the second one right here. And again, these might look really, really small, and they might be too small to really make a difference, but this is going to make another 2 inches, and you know, 2 inches of piping or bias tape can definitely make a difference, and piping especially, because like I said, it's not going to be as obvious that there's more seams than less. So, you know, I know with bias tape, I try to make them longer pieces so that I don't have, you know, 58 the seams in my bias tape up and down my fabric, but you're also seeing, you know, at least a ½ inch of that bias tape. And with piping, especially the small piping that I am making, you're only going to see a teeny tiny bit of that. Now this was on the fold, so I'm going to just cut this right here. Okay, so that's that. And again, these might look little, but they are going to make a difference whenever we get them sewn together. And I'm clipping my notches because I am notorious for forgetting and then unpinning things and not not having my notches clipped and having to pin things back up again. So I'm just doing that so I don't forget. And then we're going to cut out the back, and again we're going to go through that same process and grab these as far as the bias. And this is going to be, I think this is too narrow for buttons, so I'm going to put that right there. But you will, if you stick around and watch me for a while, you will notice that I do try really hard to save as much fabric as I can for all the other little things that I might decide to do. Bias tape, piping, buttons, all of those things. Any little scrap that I have, I will generally hang on to it just in case it comes in handy. It's always nice to have just a little extra somewhere that, you know, you might not think you need it, but if it's, you know, a 3/4 inch circle with a little tiny bit around that, you know, you can make a button out of that. And if you have a whole bunch of little pieces like this that are just small, but you know, I could make 2 buttons out of this, at least 1, 2, right side by side. So, you know, I like to hang on to this stuff because it's definitely will come in handy later. And when you draw your well, for me, the reason that I draw the bias like I did here onto the fabric before I cut everything out was so that I would know that I had the correct angle from the selvage without having to do it with little misshapen pieces that already had something cut out of them. So if I did it while it was flat and square, or rectangly, I guess, you know, it was a lot easier for me to just draw those in ahead of time and then cut them out after. And it's a good way to just use up every inch of the fabric that you can by just prepping for that in advance. So. And now I am going to not cut out these others right now. You can see they're drawn here. In fact, I am going to cut them out so that they don't do that, get unfolded and be funny. So let me just do that really quickly because I've only drawn on the one side. So I want to make sure that they're mostly straight. And then we'll come back to these later after I get this all cut out because we're going to focus on the bodice. But I'm going to keep this stack, and the stack will just keep growing. And every little bit of this is going to turn into this really lovely piping that I'm going to make. Piping is a lot more forgiving than bias tape is because you're just folding it in half. So I made this a little wider, I think, than I really needed to, but I like to have that extra bit for buttons. Again, this piece is big enough for buttons, so I'm going to put it over here. I like to have that extra little bit so that whenever I'm sewing it down, I have more to hold on to and sort of more maneuverability. I'm going to trim it down a little bit whenever I get to that part anyway, but I just wanted to make sure I had plenty. So I made these strips 2 inches wide. Now this strip is going to be way too small to really bother because by the time you get the 2 seams in there, you're going to have about 3/4 of an inch, but I am going to save it because I can make buttons out of that, at least 2 and maybe 1/3. So I'm going to keep that out to the side as well. Same thing over here. This is not the right shape for a bias strip, but it can be used for buttons. So I'm going to take this piece off as well and put it over here. I have a little box and I just keep all my scraps that I can use to make buttons or patches or whatever little things I might need to make. So it's usually bias tape or buttons, but that's what that stack is for. And I'm going to end up, before we're done, I'm going to end up drawing out a lot more of this. So we will not, probably not touch onto the piping tonight because I really want to focus on finishing up this bodice. So I just wanted to fit this in before anything got maneuvered around. So I wanted to make sure that was going where it needed to go. Okay, so now we have these 2 pieces, and the next thing that we're going to work on after the piping is going to be the sleeves, which I've already got the lining pinned in place, but again, we're going to leave that until after we get the piping, the bodice ready and the piping done. So for now, let's do this in this order. We're going to show you what I did in between. So here's my bodice. We put this together in the last video. And since then, I have interlined it with a white denim. And I did this to just give it a little bit more sort of sturdiness. And what I did, and I deliberately, I've already finished up most of it, but I deliberately left this side open so that I could show you, is that what underneath here, before I sew it up, let's see if I can pull a pin so I can show you. If you can see that, the denim does not have the dart. I just cut the dart out because I didn't want a big bulky spot right there. So I'm actually just sewing it down by hand. So I'm just going to whip stitch this very quickly. It's the last little edge. It's 3 inches here. And what I'm doing is I'm just grabbing the denim, but not the fabric on the other side. So you're never going to see these stitches. These stitches will disappear and we will never know about them again. And once I put the lining in, this gets sandwiched between the lining and the main fabric, so you're not going to see it at all. So it doesn't have to be perfect or gorgeous. All you have to do is make sure that you only grab the denim and not the outside fabric. Sometimes that takes a little practice. If you're not practiced at it, it might be a little, take you a little bit longer, but it is something that you can do. Am I still on camera? Okay, good. So I have a habit of drifting off the space that I'm supposed to be filming in, so I wanted to make sure I was still there. So again, I'm just doing a really plain, simple whip stitch to get this dart to lay down on the denim that I put in between it and the main fabric. And that will finish this up all really nicely. And then we'll talk about the mistake that I made, which again, I don't like to hide things like this because I want you guys to see that, you know, mistakes, it's one of the things that I like to stand on, is that you can make a mistake. It's going to happen. Everybody makes mistakes, but you can also fix it. It's not the end of your project. It's not the end of the world. It's just another little step in the work that you have to do. So let me tie this off very quickly. That's it. I did all the rest already. I just wanted to show you guys before I closed it up completely what I did. So we're going to close that and we're going to cut this. And then if you can see that, well, of course you can see it because I'm going to call it Frankenstein stitching right there. So what happened was I put the denim in, I got it all sewn together at the seams, I lined everything up nice and neatly. I put everything together, I sewed a straight stitch around the armholes to kind of keep everything where it's supposed to be. I did a zigzag stitch around the top and down the back, and I left the bottom open. And I left the bottom open because that's sort of the least of the problems at the moment. What happened was, like, everything fell exactly the way it was supposed to. Everything laid smoothly. It was perfect until I got to this section right here. This side all laid perfectly smoothly, and this side laid like this part right here and the sleeve laid perfectly smoothly. But for some reason, between here and here on the top part of this denim, I had some kind of strange buckling. There was a part right there that was just buckled up really badly. And so all I did was whenever it wasn't sewn together yet, I cut straight down to the dart to release that pucker, because everything else, like I said, everything else was lining up. It was just this section right here. So I just split it and then I overlapped it and I hand stitched it together. That's it. It's gonna hold exactly the way I need it to. And yeah, it looks super ugly right here, sure. But once I put the lining on it, you're not gonna be able to see it. This disappears inside the bodice forever. So as long as it holds, as long as it's in the position it needs to be in, and this is really sturdy, it's gonna stay right where I want it to be, right there. So that's all I did. And so this was a mistake. I don't know how it happened. I think I must have, I don't know. I have to be honest, I have no idea how I got only this little section right here, just right here, not even to the bottom of the dart, probably about halfway down the dart was just puckered, and I don't know how I did it, but it happened. So I went ahead and just made a stitch, or made a clip down that line, and I just stitched it together. And like I said, it's going to disappear right inside the lining, so we don't have to worry about that. So that being said, now I've finished this up. That actually took me way less time than I thought it would. This is the bodice. It's going to look so great whenever it's finished, but this is the wrong side of the bodice with the interlining in there, and it just gives it a little bit more sort of weight and stiffness to the fabric. So I really like the way it feels. So the next thing that we want to do, and this is why I was working on the bias strips, and I may make a few more before we start, is that the next thing I want to do is put the piping. So the piping is going to go all the way up the back where it closes, and then it's going to go around the neckline, all the way around the neckline, all the way over, and then back down this side as well. So I'm just going to need a yard, maybe. So I don't know that we're going to need to cut too many more strips, but I do want to cut a few more because I want to make sure that we have enough before I start sewing them together. So I'm going to take another piece over here that is a scrap. This is the scrap from the arms that I cut out. because I did the arms and the bodice at the same time for the lining, because I had to pull this fabric out anyway, so I thought I'll just do them both at the same time. So I'm just going to take, this is my selvage edge, so I'm just going to take that and I'm going to take my 45-degree angle, which is marked on this ruler, and I'm just going to lay it right up against that. And I'm probably going to do it way over here, actually. Make sure it's lined up, and then I'm just going to start marking just a little like that. I love silk to peony for this, because it's a very nice flat fabric that takes to the pencil very well, so that makes me happy. All right, so I'm going to go out again. I just need 2 inches, and I'm just going to draw it again. 1, 2, 3, just like that. I don't know why it had to be 3, but 1, 2, 3 it was. So, and I'm probably going to need more than this, but I'm just going to do a couple of lines here so you don't have to watch me do this all night. And then we're going to cut that out, and then this is going to be plenty for the piping around the neckline. So we're going to do that. Okay, so, and the reason I'm doing this, so now I have 2 fairly long strips that I can center. This is actually 1, 2, and 3, 4, because this is a double layer, that I can actually center it so that the front of the bodice is longer strips with less seams in them, even though it's going to be a lot less noticeable on piping. And you'll see what I mean once I put the piping into place and get this sewn onto the cord. You're gonna see it's not as visible whenever it's just piping. So, because all you're seeing is that little bump from where the cord is, and not a 1/2 inch of bias tape. So I'm gonna put this back in my stash because that's gonna be more bias later. But for now, this is all we really need. So I'm just going to do this. And you can feel free to zip past a little bit if you like. I know this is maybe not the most exciting thing to look at, but we're gonna get these cut out, and then we're going to sew them together, and then we're gonna make piping. So if you don't know how to make piping, when I bring out the white cotton cording, you'll know, and that's whenever I'm gonna make the piping itself, and you can stop fast forwarding there if you like. But in the meantime, you can do, this is just regular bias strips, and you can cut them with a rotary cutter. You can cut them with your scissors. There's a lot of different ways to do them. In this case, I was just trying to work around the space that I had, so I went ahead and did it that way. And I'm on a kick. In the last week or so, I've been on a kick to make bias tape correctly instead of incorrectly, because I have a bad habit of making bias tape the wrong way. So we are going to try really hard to make bias tape the correct way. And I thought I had an empty bobbin out here, but I don't. So I'm just going to grab one very quickly from behind me. And we're going to get started on this. And start making piping. And I'm going to keep my piping in this gold. I thought about making it in the blue, but then I decided that I really just didn't want a different, like an alternating color there. I wanted it to just be the blue. Earlier today, I did a little bit of cleaning on Astrid, and she is just clinging to every bit of dust that's come around this week, so I don't know if I'm ever going to get rid of it. So I'm just poking. This is a brand new thread, because whenever I'm at the store, I like to, if I buy fabric, I buy thread to match. So I'm just going to move my camera just a little bit so you can still see what I'm doing, because, you know, sewing is fun, and you have to see what I'm doing, or it won't make any difference to you. It is really glaring today, and I don't know why my lighting is being so fussy, but let's just see if we can. How about that? That's probably going to be better for you. All right. So I'm just going to very quickly wind my bobbin. And any of this stuff, if you are watching and would like to learn how to do this, you should follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/prettypetticoats. I do live streams on Thursdays and Sundays, and I really very much enjoy explaining how I do things, but you can see me a lot better and what I'm doing a lot better on my live stream. So if you would like to get any instructions on how to do any of these things, or you have any questions that you'd like to ask or anything like that, I will put my Twitch stream coordinates down below, and you can jump on one day and ask your questions. All right, that's that. It doesn't take too long if you just let it do its thing. So I can't tell which one of them is causing the I don't know which one of them is causing the glare. All right, maybe it's me. Pretty pale, so sometimes I like cause things to be brighter than they really need to be. All right, so now I'm just threading, and then I'm going to explain the difference between my terrible way of making bias tape, which is incorrect and you should not do, and the better way of making it, and I'll show you why and all of that as well. So a long time ago, I kind of got this sort of laziness going on, and I decided that the easiest way to make bias tape for me was to take the two pieces, right? There's two pieces here. So just take them and sew straight across here. And what would happen was if you sew straight across there, then it would open up and become a piece of bias, right? And that's fine. Here's the problem with that. When you sew straight across, when you sew straight across your piece of bias right here, and just sort of remove that angle from the scenario, when you fold your bias out and then fold it in half and in half again for your, in half and then tuck your ends in, which again, if you want to know how to make bias tape, come see me on my Twitch stream. I love to make bias tape, and I love to show you guys how to do it. But if you have a seam that goes straight across from here to here, it's going to make a really, like, all of the seam is going to be in one spot on your bias. So when you fold it up, that one spot is going to be super thick. So you don't want to do that. Now in this case, this is just piping. I could do that, but because I want to show you guys how to do this properly, I'm going to do this. So you want to line this up so that it's making a little square. If you can see it, yeah, you can see it because the light's going through that. You want to be a little square, and you want to sew from this corner right here to this corner right here in a diagonal line, okay? So I eyeball this because I have been doing this way too long, but you can also just mark that with a ruler. I'm going to eyeball it because you will really get bored if I sit here and draw lines on all of these things as well. So I'm just going to real quick start sewing these together. But you just want to do this line like that. And the reason that you want to do that way is because when you, just trying to give you some room. So you do that, and then you just trim this down to about 1/4 inch. There's a very naughty doggy next door that likes to bark at everything. So right down to about 1/4 inch from your seam right there. So there's your seam, cut about 1/4 inch away. I think it's a little bit longer than I want it to be, but that's really not the end of the world. And then when you open this out and press it, it becomes this perfectly straight piece of bias tape. But now, instead of having a seam that just goes up and down right here in a straight line, you have, when you're doing bias, a seam that is distributed over a 2-inch section or a 1.5-inch section. So you don't have that bulkiness right where your bias tape is. In this case, it's not really as important because I'm making piping, but I'm just going to do it anyway because I'm trying to get myself into the habit, because like I said, I'm a very, very terrible person, and I tend to make my bias tape the fast and easy way, and then I end up sorry for it later. So I'm going to try to keep doing it the correct way, just to break my bad habit. That's what I want to do here. So now the other thing that I'm doing is I'm putting these long strips right in the middle so that there's another one. When you unfold it, it just becomes this nice straight piece with a diagonal seam. So I'm going to move this back a little bit so I'm not blinding you every time I move my arm in here. That did not help as much as I thought it would. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to flip the rest of these together, and then we're going to move on to the piping, which is the next big part of this procedure. You also have to make sure that you're making the angles so that it does fold open the way you want it to. You don't want to sew this so that it folds open the wrong way, because that would be weird. So just make sure it's going to fold open the right way. Oh, I lost my thread. Happens sometimes. All right. So I didn't measure it to see how much I needed. You can obviously do that. I just tend to guess that it's going to be about 1.25 yards or so to get around. So probably I'm going to do roughly 2 yards essentially, so that it will go all the way around the bodice neckline, and also down the backs where it needs to, so that it covers that whole spot. So I'm just guesstimating that number. Oh, I did it again. Hold on. But it's going to be roughly about that much. So come on now. Somebody got tangled. All right, let's try it again. Here we go. And again, this is awfully boring, and I totally get that. So if you need to fast forward and get to the next spot, like I said, I will be pulling out a piece of white cording, and once I do that, that's where we're starting on the next part. So don't feel guilty if you need to fast forward a little bit. I'm sure that watching me do this 5 times is not going to make it any better for you than watching it twice or 3 times. So I will see you in just a minute if you want to go ahead, and if you don't, we will stay here and babble while I do these, so that you can see my crazy sewing habits. I have a lot of bad habits, and I try very hard to tell you what they are and tell you not to do them. So some of my habits I absolutely know are bad habits, and some of them are not so bad. It just depends on how you look at it, I guess. So, all right, one more here. And again, like this is one of my bad habits. I'm totally eyeballing this instead of just drawing the lines, which would make it a lot more, you know, perfect. But again, I try not to stress out about that kind of stuff, because if I do, it ends up being more stress than I really want to deal with. And I want to enjoy my sewing, so I tend to be a little lazy about some things. Not all things. There are certainly some things that I just can't take shortcuts with. It's just not, it's not something I'm capable of doing. But in some cases, now this is probably not enough, but we're getting close. So we've got about 4. So this is actually, oh, this isn't bad. This is 34 and this is, so this is 40 inches. I'm only gonna need a little bit more. That's not bad at all. Grab some of my longer pieces over here. Okay. See, if I sewed that this way, it would not open the correct way. So, well, it would, but you have to be very careful about which direction you sew it. So it has to go the same angle. Yeah, see, this is going to be wrong if I sew it that way. So let's try this, because this is where I want it to be. Sometimes I will absolutely put something in the wrong place. Once upon a time, and I was talking about this earlier tonight on my stream, I accidentally sewed a sleeve into an armhole. So I like to double check myself now and make sure that I don't have to take out anything like that, because that can be super frustrating. So that's another, so now we're at 46, okay. We're getting there. It's gonna take a few more strips, but not too many. I'm just trying to vary the ones that I grab so that I have some longer ones and some shorter ones, but not a whole bunch of short ones all together, because again, that's the place where, yeah, see. So if you look at this, when you put it down, if I sew this seam this way, then it opens this way. So that should be correct. And in general, it means the long end needs to be out to your left and this long end needs to be towards you, but it's so easy to do this wrong if you're not, and this is exactly why I started doing it the lazy way. If you're not super careful, you could do it wrong. So this is the better way to do it. The lazy way works. You know, it's good enough, but this is definitely the better way to do it as far as keeping the bulk down and, you know, putting the seam, sort of spreading it out instead of having it all in one place. So and these are smaller. Usually I work with longer strips of bias in order to make my bias tape. But in this case, because we are just making piping, I'm deeming it okay to use up every little scrap, especially because silk to peony, I mean, I got this for $10 a yard, so that's pretty pricey, which is another reason that I really wanted to use up every little inch that I could in between the pieces I was cutting out and that kind of thing, because I want to make sure that I use as much of this fabric as possible so that none of it goes to waste. So if you've been fast forwarding, oops, here's my cording. We're about to do the next part. So This is tiny cording. As you can see, it's cotton cording. I got it at Joann's. And what you're going to want to do, so this is obviously your seams are, you know, they go the right way out, just like any seam does. And I'm just trimming this because I can, but you don't have to. So you're going to put, this is the wrong side with the seam, and you're going to put the, it's happening again, there you go. You're going to put the cording on the wrong side. And you can open out your seams and iron them down if you want to. I'm just going to push them one direction or the other and just let it be the way it is. So, and this may not be long enough, but I'm going to give it a go anyway because I think that it probably is. And the other thing that you want to do is you want to switch out your foot. So this is my regular sewing foot, and I'm just going to switch it out for my zipper foot. And that looks just like this. If you can see that, it's got little knobs. So it has two spots here where you can hook the foot in place, and then you can sew on either side of the foot here or over here just by moving your foot and then moving your needle. So in this case, I am going to have to move my needle because it is literally directly in the path of the metal in the center, and I have sewn over that, and it is a terrible, terrible thing. So I'm just going to shift this so that it goes over where it needs to. Perfect. Okay. So you're going to get that lined up, and it may be different for your machine, so I'm not going to try to walk you through that because you know, all machines are different, but I will tell you what I tell everyone, which is read your manual. I read mine all the time. In fact, mine is sitting right here within arm's reach, so read your manual. So I'm just going to put that in there on the wrong side with the the seams, and then I'm just going to fold it in half right over that cord, right? Just like that. And then after you do that, you're going to sew really, really close to that cord. If you know what piping is, then you have a general idea of what you're going to need to do with this. So in this case, I am starting from the wrong end because I want to sew on this side. So we're going to come over here. We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to put this down and I'm going to fold this in half. This is why I was saying that I didn't need a specific, I didn't need wider, I could have used narrower, I didn't need a specific perfect edge, you know, that kind of thing. And then I'm just going to put my cord right up against the edge of my foot, and I'm going to start sewing. And as you're going, you're going to want to make sure that everything is staying where you want it to be. Don't pull anything so that it gets twisted or stretched in any way. Just keep it steady where it's supposed to be. And don't go too fast. Don't sew over the cord. You know, just go gently. And this is also a lot of fun to do. I should actually do this more often just for relaxation purposes. But making bias tape is probably one of my favorite things to do. Making piping is right up there with bias tape. They're both similar, but they're also both really fun to make. So it just depends on if I want to use the iron or if I want to use the sewing machine, because this is all sewing machine. It's sewing them together and then sewing the cording in, and you have piping, whereas bias tape is sewing them together and then ironing and ironing and ironing until you have bias tape. So it just depends on which I want to do, but I actually enjoy doing them very much. Enjoy making both. So, and like I said, don't pull anything, don't stretch anything, just make sure that everything is staying fairly centered, that you have all your seams pressed down the direction you want them to, and that your foot is right up against the cord. And then when you're done, you'll have this beautiful piece of piping to work with. And I'm just going to make enough of this to do the next step on the bodice so you guys can see where we're going with the dress, because I am very excited about this dress and about this project, and I really want to show you guys where it's going. So actually we're doing very well. Very soon we're going to be sewing the skirts on, and you will not have to watch me cut those out because those were really big pieces and I didn't want you to have to sit through me struggling with that much fabric all in one go. So the skirt pieces, the dress piece of the skirt pieces, yeah, are quite literally a big amount of fabric, and it was polyester satin, which means that it wiggles around like crazy. And the overlay is a polyester chiffon, which also shifts around like crazy. So I didn't want you guys to watch every boring thing that I did, which is why I interlined the bodice off camera as well, because watching me hand sew those bits into place is not really that exciting. So I keep thinking that I have a pucker when in fact it's just one of my seams and I'm just seeing it incorrectly. So, all right. So as you can see, this can go very quickly if you're just zooming along. Don't, you know, stress out about it. Don't pull anything so that it's stretching it. Just make sure that your cord is nice and tight against that fold so that it's not wobbling around. Be careful when you're going over your seams because you can wobble too far away from the cord if you're not careful. So just make sure you're paying attention there. And normally I would cut this off, but I don't think I'm going to cut the string off or the cord off until I'm certain that I don't need more, which probably won't matter because I'm probably going to have to, yeah, I'm just going to cut it off. It's fine. If I need more, I will have to finagle it anyway. So I'm going to cut this off right there. We're going to pick this up off the floor because I dropped it. And then I'm just going to show you guys this lovely, lovely piping. Look at that. It is 100% handmade piping. All you're going to see is that very, very thin edge on the outside. So now you have, in this case, we have about, so probably about 48, probably have about just about 57 or so inches of piping, and that's it. That was how fast that was. So I know some of you may have zoomed along a little faster. Again, I don't blame you at all. Sometimes it can be pretty boring to sit through this. I didn't want to push something off my table, and I almost did. So let's move that. Okay, so now the next thing that we're going to do here, I'm going to push this back down a little bit more, is we're going to pin it into place around the neckline. Now remember, yeah, we're not going to worry about it because as you can see, it's really thin edge. So I'm not worried about any of the seams because they're almost invisible. And they are fairly far apart, so I'm not super worried about that either. So here's where it gets tricky. You have to pin it to the right side of the fabric, and you want to pin it in this way, right? But I made this super wide because I wanted that extra space. So what I'm going to do is mark in my seam allowance, which is only 1/2 inch, okay? So we're talking about right here. Helps if it's if it's writing. So, and I'm going to do this in a little tiny section. We're going to do this in batches. Because again, I don't want to bore the wits out of you guys, but let's move that off camera. Okay, so I don't want to bore you guys, so I'm going to do right here. Now this is what we're going to do. We're going to line up the piping, not the raw edge, but the piping itself, right at that seam allowance. Okay, so we're going to put it right there. And that's going to allow the piping to sit, even though if you look at the other side, it means that your piping is hanging off the edge, but that doesn't matter, because like I said, you want it to be right at your seam allowance, not way off into the project. So, and then you're just going to not drop your pins. You're gonna, and I'm pinning this down right up against the edge of because I'm going to use my piping foot again as well. So I'm just going to pin it right up against the edge there. And I'm sure there's going to be 17 people who are just going to cringe when they see me do this. But so we're going to come up to this corner. And you saw I marked where the 1/2 inch was here. And then I also marked where it was here. I'm going to move the camera so that you're looking down at this again, because I think that is helpful for you. There you go. So again, I've already marked the 1/2 inch on this part and the 1/2 inch on this part. So I'm just going to right up to that section, right up to that part that I marked, not all the way to the corner. And I'm just going to pin that right down on that line, which is perfect, just like that. And then when you get to this corner, this is how you handle the corners. So you're going to want to cut yourself a little slit right there, but not past your sewing line. Don't cut into your sewing line. Just enough that you can curve around that corner. Okay, so you're going to do that. Nope, I cut it in the wrong place. Too high. Sorry. Don't cut anything else. Make sure that you're only cutting your bias strip and not through. Okay, sorry. So you're going to cut right, just basically just even with the line that you want it to be on. That will help you. And then I'm going to turn it so that I can line it up on that line and pin it down. Now this is going to go all the way around, obviously. But I want to stop here because I want to show you guys this part, and then we're going to do the rest of it off camera, because I think this would be fairly boring for you if you had to sit through this the entire time. But so what you do is just clip even with that 1/2 inch seam allowance at the top, and then you turn it and it goes around. Now, when you sew this down, I'm going to come back over here with my machine. Hopefully it will not glare too much in the angle that it is in now. Let's see if I can get it to work. Come on. There we go. Okay. So in this case, and I would normally say start from the edge and work your way up and around. I'm going to do that. I would rather do it from the other side, which is would make it a little bit easier, but that's okay. So we're going to okay, so if that happens, I don't know if you can see that, but if that happens, so I had, where I cut, there's a little tiny bit of the seam. Obviously, all of this is disappearing into everything else, so I'm just going to snip that off so that it will not be in the way of that angle right there. I'm just going to, it literally is just a little part of the seam that is puckering It doesn't need to be there. Okay, excellent. I'm not going to do too much because I don't want to lose that seam, and I'm going to bring you up a little bit more so you guys can see this better. Okay, so normally I would start from the other side and I'd sew all the way around and I'd get to this point and sew down. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start at that point and sew down. And again, I will do the rest of it off camera because I don't want you guys to have to sit through that entire piece of sewing because it can get pretty boring. So in this case, I'm moving my needle back to the other side. Sorry, this way. And I'm moving my foot over as well because I want to sew on the other side of the foot this time. Come on. It is just being difficult tonight. Okay, there we go. All right. So I'm going to sew on this side of the foot instead of this side of the foot this time because that's the side that the cording is on and I want it to bump up against that cording. So I'm going to go way down here to where I've actually got it pinned in place. I don't want to sew before that because it's not pinned into place where I want it before that. And I'm also going to pull out my pins because as I'm going because I don't want to sew over them. It can cause all kinds of havoc. It can break your needle. It can break your thread. It can do a lot of things, and I'd rather not do any of them. So I'm going to, just before I start, I'm going to move my needle just a tiny bit because it is too far over. One more. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to sew from right here. And I know it's nothing but a glare, so let's try this. Hold on one second. There you go. It's all sorts of bright and shiny in here. It's not helping things at all. But anyways, we're going to put this in. Again, I'm going to pull my needles as I go so I don't sew over any of them. And when I get to this corner, just going to make sure that that piece is tucked under because you want to keep all of that intact as you're going. And then I'm just going to go right down the side right here. Super simple to do. You may have to lift your foot a little bit to get the cording to go underneath the back. When you turn like that, it doesn't always smoothly go underneath, so needles being persnickety. All right, and then you're going to go right down like this. All the way to the bottom. Okay. Now, again, I'm just going to show you some very little parts of this because I'm not going to do the entire thing on camera and make you guys crazy. If you have any questions about any of these types of things that I'm doing, please feel free to jump on to Twitch or Facebook or leave me a question below. Any of those things will work. I'm happy to answer questions. If you leave questions below and follow me, I will probably answer your questions on future videos here. So you can also just do that. And I will put all of that, all those ways to contact me below. So this is the back of the lining, and I'm just showing you how this is going to look. We're not going to actually sew this in place yet because it's not ready for that. So I sewed that down, and now I'm going to, on the wrong side, I'm going to go back through and just trim down the tape that the excess that was outside of the seam allowance. I'm going to trim that off just like this. So I had plenty to work with. I didn't have to worry about anything slipping and sliding and not being where I wanted it to be. And then we will sew, whenever we get to this part, we will sew this back piece into place. I'm just going to do a really quick pin job here so that I can fold it out and show you what it's going to look like. So now it's pressed right up against that seam allowance, which is the correct seam allowance now. And it's a little harder for, well, it's hard for you to see because my arm's in the way, but it is a little harder for you to see because it's all the same color, and the piping is a very thin piping, but you can kind of see a little bit how it bulks up right where you're pinning it. So it's very visible under, I'm pinning this the wrong way. Of course I am. It's like, why is it curving? Yeah, try the right side, dear. Okay, one more time. This is the correct side. It's lining up now. And I'm just going to pin it just a few spots so that you can see what will happen when you sew it together and turn it right side out. And because I trimmed that up, I'm going right up to the edge because that's what needs to line up. So you're definitely going to want to trim that before you put the lining in place. One more pin right here. So then whenever you put the lining in and you turn it out, this is what you're going to end up with, if you can see that. So the lining's going to get, of course, put onto the inside, and you're going to have this lovely, once it's sewn down, you're going to have this lovely piping that shows on the front of or on the outside, I guess, of the fabric. So that is, there it is. That is what the piping will look like once you get it sewn down. Of course, it won't be sticking out like that because it'll look like that all the way around. But we're not ready to sew the lining in place yet because I have to finish the piping first and then sew the lining together. So I am going to call it at that. I will finish the piping around the neckline and down the other side of the back off camera, and then we will revisit the next steps. When you see me next time, this will probably already be sewn together and sewn in place and flipped right side out and ironed down. So when you see this again, it will have the lining on the inside sewn to all the places that the piping was sewn to, and it will be tacked to the armholes. We are going to put piping in the armholes as well, so it's going to be hand sewn on the inside of that, but that's okay. So in the next video, in part 3, we will be going to the skirts that get attached to this, and there's such a beautiful blue color. I'm so excited about them. Like I said, it was a lot of cutting. It's a big amount of fabric, and I still have to finish the poly chiffon before I can get that all ready and sewn into place. But we're going to be moving on to the skirts. So next video I will show you the bodice all the way up until we're at the place where we're moving on to skirts, and we will start on that. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I'm going to put all the information below, so if you would like to follow me or catch me on one of my other accounts, you're more than welcome to. I would love to see you on Twitch, or pop up on Facebook or Instagram. You will most likely see pictures of this as it gets a little bit more put together. We are, this is a YouTube only project, so I do a lot of sewing on my live stream, and none of the live stream has any of this dress in it. So you will only see this dress here, but if you're interested in any other kind of sewing, I am always working on some project or another on my sewing stream on Thursday nights at 5:30 Eastern and on Sunday afternoons at 2 p.m. Eastern. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.